Money FM 89.3. Best of breakfast. Morning Shot.
Welcome to Morning Shot. I'm Audrey Seek. Singapore's small retailers are facing a tough road ahead. As commercial rents continue to rise, more local businesses, from bakeries and cafes to independent boutiques, are finding it hard to stay afloat. Just last year alone, more than 3,000 F&B businesses shut down, the highest annual figure in 20 years. And the trend isn't slowing. Monthly closures in the first quarter of this year have already surpassed 300. Many point to unsustainable rent hikes as a key reason, along with shifting consumer habits and declining footfall in once busy neighborhoods. One example is Flor Patisserie, which will close its final outlet at Siglap Drive this July after being hit with a whopping 57% rent increase. This morning, we take a closer look at how rising rent, changing consumer behavior, and market saturation are reshaping Singapore's F&B landscape. What does this all mean for local entrepreneurship and long-term rental sustainability? We have two guests joining us to unpack all of this. We're joined today by Heidi Tan, co-owner of Flor Patisserie. Heidi, thanks so much for being here on the show.
Hello, good morning.
Thank you for joining us. And we also bring in Dr. Guy Llewellyn into the conversation, assistant professor of hospitality at EHL Hospitality Business School, who's also spent years in the F&B scene. Good morning, Guy. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have the two of you on. We've seen the headlines, of rising rents and businesses being affected by this. But let's hear from someone who's dealing with this firsthand. Heidi, you've been running Flor Patisserie since 2010. What would you say has changed the most about operating a physical store today compared to when you first started? And how have those changes kind of affected how long a business can realistically hang on?
I think the thing that changed the most is how we deal with labor. So in 2010, when we first started, it was a lot easier to hire and we could manage the costs much better. And it was a very profitable time for all businesses, not just for us. And then when we hit 2017, there was a huge manpower crush, and then labor became very expensive and very difficult to hire. And then come COVID, we had food prices soaring, and then we saw the ingredients, the cost of our ingredients went up by 20%. It's like year on year. It's like in 2020, eggs went up. Then in 2021, butter went up. That's specific to my industry, okay?
Yeah.
Then in 2022, chocolate went up. Yeah, so these are ingredients that we use a lot. We also saw food costs increasing, and rent has always been increasing. I started the business when I was 21. And at that time, I thought it's normal for rent to go up year on year and to go up like 30% or even 40%. But now that I am older and I start to think about it, I don't think it's right for landlords to increase rents like that, to not having to justify for rent increases.
Yeah, so we talked about the rent increase, but it seems like costs are going up all around. And so, Guy, you've worn many hats in hospitality, from executive chef to general manager, club manager, and now a professor. So based on what you're hearing from local business owners today, like Heidi, what are the biggest challenges they're facing? And on the flip side, is there anything that's working well, in this tough climate?
There's two issues. The first issue is that, as Heidi mentioned, there is a huge issue with labor. It's hard to find people. It's hard to find people that are interested in joining and being part of this industry. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, what it really comes down to is rent. If you look at any sort of hospitality textbook, it says rent should be 10% of your overall cost structure. In Singapore, that's 25%. That's unsustainable. And so there's a big issue with that in regards to overall operations. And the other thing that nobody actually talks about is the restaurant market in Singapore is oversaturated. There's too many restaurants for how much money people are spending. And so everybody's now condensing their costs, how much they're spending out. There's more restaurants that come into play every day. It's just not a sustainable market for the near or for the future.
Yeah, so you talked about the 20 to 25% rental kind of percentage that takes up, the cost of running a business. We did see some headlines that say that it's gone up to 50% now. So Heidi, rent is often cited as the deal breaker for business, and we know that your rent has also been jacked up 57% here. Just how big a factor is it in business planning or survival? And is there a general benchmark, like, what percentage of cost is reasonable before it starts tipping into the danger zone?
The current rent we're paying is about 20% of our total sales. So anything higher than that, it's unsustainable, because even now we're just barely surviving. Have you seen how bad the market is? Every long weekend, half Singapore is missing. It's gone out of Singapore. And we're not just competing against our own saturated market. We're competing against the global market with our neighbors, with Malaysia, with Bangkok, with Japan, So people, they choose to spend their money overseas, right? Yeah, so anything above 20%, we cannot sustain. And the 10% textbook, that has never been true, not in Singapore.
Yeah. So people often talk about, rental pressure in very general terms. But Heidi, we know that your rent went up. What does this kind of rental pressure look like for you on a day-to-day level? Where do you find yourself having to cut corners to manage?
It hasn't went up yet. So right now we're paying $5,004 and the landlord is asking for $8,005, and I do not agree to that. But if at Siglap Drive, at this very unappealing location with no footfall, and if I were to take on the $8,005, I don't think I can survive for more than 3 months, because I would have been bleeding. And right now it's our slow month, June, July, August, especially June because it's a school holiday. Everyone will be traveling. It's our slow month. So I would have been bleeding for like the next 3 months, and then it's unsustainable, and I would have to pre-terminate my rental contract. And then guess what? I still have to pay rent because, I'm legally bound to pay rent. And then I would have to close my company and think of a way to pay back the landlord for all the debt that I owe him, right? So I don't want to go into that arrangement.
Yeah. So Guy, I want to bring you in now. From your point of view here, are current rental models at all sustainable in the long run for smaller players in Singapore, or even, the mid-sized or the bigger ones? What kinds of alternatives might offer a better balance between landlord and tenant interests?
So right now, the problem is that there is no controls. And so because there's no controls, the landlords can set the prices at whatever they want. And as long as there's someone that takes it, it's fine. Now, there are some models out there that what you could do, but they're not going to be achievable in Singapore. So you could look at options of putting in a price ceiling, all right, and limiting how much the increase of the rent each month. That's not going to work here. You could look at doing a revenue sharing model of, a mixed model of a smaller fixed cost and a percentage of sales. That's just not going to work here as well. So while people are still interested in the market because it sounds fun, it sounds intriguing, while people are still willing to pay these exorbitant rental prices, there's nothing that's going to be done. So that's the problem, that there has to be a tipping point of where do operators say enough is enough.
Yeah. So where do you see the biggest gaps then in support for small business tenants right now?
The biggest gap is that nobody's actually helping. Nobody's looking at it. Nobody's controlling what landlords can raise. So that's why if the government could step in and say, listen, this is the max capacity, this is the max that you can raise it year after year, then there's going to be limits that you don't get that 57% raise.
Right.
Maybe during the course of that landlord-tenant relationship, it's 5% a year up until when that tenant leaves, and then you can have a nominal increase after that. But unless the government wants to come in and set that price ceiling, which is not going to be a realistic option, there's really not much else that can happen.
Okay, but we're talking about over 3,000 closures last year alone. So clearly, it isn't just a few businesses struggling. It's a much wider pattern here. So what would it take for action to be taken? And what do you think is at stake if this trend continues?
We're talking about the 3,000 that closed, but there's also over 3,000 that actually opened. The restaurant industry in whole is actually growing. All right, so there's still people that are willing to take on that exorbitant lease because they think they're going to be able to have that opportunity to grow. So there are a lot that closed down. There's a lot of name brand ones that closed down. We saw, Eggslut closing a few months ago.
Yeah.
That was a massive one. All right. And there's other players in the game that are also leaving. But as people are still willing to take on those rents, it's not going to change.
Yeah. So Heidi, as a business owner, what are some of the trickle-down effects of rising rent that most customers probably don't realize? And we're talking beyond just higher prices here. anything that we customers actually have to take on with these rising rents that you face?
Yeah, I mean, it's not trickle down, it's direct. So beyond raising prices, I have to look at my food cost because I can squeeze my food cost. And then let's say chocolate is expensive, right? So I would have to pull out my chocolate flavors. And if fruits are expensive, I have to cut back on fruits. So it restricts on what I can offer because I need to think about my profit margin. And then on top of that, we have to be efficient, right, with labor. So I can't hire as many staff as I wish I could. And it impacts our service, right? Our customer service, because I only have like maybe 1 or 2 staff manning the counter. And if we are overwhelmed, then we are overwhelmed. We cannot offer the kind of service or quality that we want. And I have to push my staff to be more efficient, to work for longer, to be faster. So it's just a really tough time to be in F&B.
Yeah. So Flor Patisserie is a great example of a business that brings, something more personal and special to a neighborhood. In your opinion, what do we stand to lose, as consumers and as a society when small independent shops like yours disappear?
We will lose that, the kampong spirit, the community. We lose the special relationship that we build up because I've been in the industry for 15 years. We have our long-time customers. We grew up with them. They started buying our cakes when they were 20 and now they're mothers and they're buying the cakes for their kids. So this is the community that we lose, right? When operators like me, the small ones that we close out, that we have relationships with our customers. So I think when we close and when the big chains take over, then we have a very sanitized environment, right?
So Guy, your take now, looking ahead, what's your outlook for the local F&B industry over the next few years, and what more can be done here to help it not just survive, but to actually thrive?
So in order to answer that one, the answer is education. Okay. And no, I'm not trying to promote myself as a professor, but the government needs to put in some sort of programs for first-time entrepreneurs that want to enter into that restaurant industry of what are they actually getting themselves into. Too many people look at what's going on the food shows and they say, that looks fun. They watch the MasterChef Singapore. That looks fun. Let me do that. Yeah. But the problem is they don't really understand what the back end is. So I would love to have more education before they're allowed to even apply for a restaurant license is, do you understand how to calculate food costs? Do you understand that a traditional restaurant will run, if they're lucky, a 4% margin? So how can you then cost that? How can you then say, is that rent actually potentially possible? So I would love to have more of education to those entrepreneurs so they understand what they're actually walking in the door and how many coffees, how many plates of food do they have to serve over the course of that lease agreement in order to make it actually profitable. And I think people will be very surprised when they're looking at a 2-4% profit margin. That's considered good. And so that way we need to have more education because otherwise you're still going to have people that come into the industry, but you're also at the same time going to have more people leaving the industry. Yeah. So the restaurant industry will still grow over the years, but it's not going to be profitable growth.
Okay. Well, education is key, and behind many shuttered shops is a tough mix of rising costs, changing habits, and tough personal choices. Supporting local businesses means more than just buying their products. It's about building a system where they can truly succeed. That was Heidi Tan from Flor Patisserie and Dr. Guy Llewellyn from EHL Hospitality Business School. Thank you both for sharing such honest and grounded insights. We wish you the best of luck moving forward as well, Heidi.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Keep it here on Money FM 89.3.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.